Can be very stressful for ESL tutors. They feel like they have to know everything all at once. That's not the case. You just have to be one step ahead of your learner. Also keep in mind, if you don't know the answer to a question that they have, it's a great skill to teach your student to go and look it up with you. One day you're not going to be there to help them, so you want to teach them the skill of going and looking it up for themselves. So don't stress out about grammar. Grammar falls into two main categories. Now there's some parts that aren't going to fall into these two, but basically there's two parts. First there's parts of speech, and then there are punctuation rules. So first, parts of speech. There are 7 main parts of speech. There are articles, which are a, and the. Nouns, which are person, place, thing, or idea. Pronouns, which fall into 2 main categories. Subject pronouns, which are I, you, he, she, and it. And object pronouns, which are me, him, her, you, they, them. The fourth type of parts of speech is verbs, or verbs. Verbs can be very stressful for you and for your ESL student. So I've attached on the website with this, there's a really nice chart that goes through all the different verb tenses and has examples of each. Don't stress out about verbs. We're going to talk a little bit about how to teach those here in a minute. The 5th type of part of speech is adjectives. They describe something. Number 6 is adverbs. They describe an action. And then last is prepositions. They describe where something is. Now this isn't all of it, but mainly it's those 7 parts of speech. That's what your student really needs to know. Now if a student comes to you and says, I want to learn grammar, those are generally what they're talking about. They're talking about those 7 parts of speech. Punctuation is not as essential for our ESL student unless they really need to write for whatever their goal is. So I'm not going to get into punctuation as much, and those are rules that you should generally be more familiar with. It's not as stressful. Unfortunately, with those 7 parts of speech, teaching the rules is not only boring, but it's not the most effective way to teach. Your learner isn't as likely to remember just learning a rule. They're more likely to remember a fun, conversational method. Now, you might be thinking, how do I teach grammar without teaching the rules? If your learner wants to know the rules explicitly, you can give that to them. But try to put it in a fun, interesting context, the way they would really hear it spoken. Okay, so in the last lesson, I showed you next to and on top of. That was a fun, interactive way of teaching a grammar point without showing it, conjugating the verbs, all that kind of stuff. That gets to be dry and boring. Now, one way that you are going to explicitly teach is with a structure chart, which I'm going to show you in just a minute. We're going to look at 2 verb tenses that tend to trip up our learners. And this is more of a beginning skill. So you might not have this as much with your learner, but it's an example for you. So 2 common verb tenses that confuse our learners are simple present and present progressive. So simple present sounds like it should be happening right now, but it's not. It's describing something in the present tense. So let's look at an easy regular verb like to walk. That's not describing what's happening right now. It's describing how you do something. So I might say, I walk to school every day. It's a habitual action. I walk to school. But that's not what you're doing right now. The way you would say that is, I'm walking. Well, this messes with our learners. They tend to like that ing, so they stick it on the present, and you would get something like, I'm walking to school every day, which is not correct and can confuse somebody that they're talking to. So let's assume that you've had a few lessons on the simple present, and you've really kind of started to introduce this idea. I walk to school. It's not happening right now. It's describing how you do it, how you get there every day. So you would talk about I walk, you walk, he walks with that S, she walks. We'd go over and over this a few times, really being sure to reinforce it's not happening right now. Then a few weeks later, you might try to get that out of them. How would I say I'm doing it right now? What's the way we conjugate the verb then? Now here I'm not introducing these terms of simple present and present progressive. That can be confusing for our learners. You don't have to teach it with that terminology. You can just teach it in terms of he walks, she walks, I am walking, you are walking. Okay, so let's say you've just asked them, how do we say it's happening right now? You'll probably get something like I walking, and they leave out that to be verb, which is okay because it shows that they know the way to say it, they just haven't learned the full way of saying it. So they understand what they're trying to say. That's when you're going to introduce the how behind. So you're going to want to show them how to do it in for each different subject, because it's going to be slightly different for, as we'll see when we get to he and she. Okay, so if you're doing walking, and again, I'm using my two different colors to show my target language, you would have I am walking, you are walking, and you can leave walking if you want because it's going to stay the same. He is walking, she is walking, this is the same again, we are walking, they are walking. Now, the reason that I didn't double these up, I didn't do it like this, he, she, it, the reason I didn't do that is because you want it to read normally across. So you don't want to confuse your learner with them thinking he, she, it is walking. So that's why I give each one their own category, even though it takes up a little bit more space. So you can use a structure chart with any type of verb that you're teaching or any type of vocabulary. So this might not be what you're highlighting if you're talking about vocabulary. It might be whatever comes in this column. I am walking to school. I am walking home. I am walking to the store. That might be what you're highlighting. So this would remain in blue, and these would be red. So that's a basic structure chart. Now let's say that your learner's still confused about how this works in terms of time. I walk versus I am walking. Or any other type of verb tense. Something happening in the past versus something happening now, or something happening in the future. You can use a really simple timeline. This is a really helpful tool with our learners. Now, with any of these tools, if it confuses your learner, don't do it. This is just to be an extra help. So this is our general timeline. Time continues, so we want to have these little arrows so that they know that it keeps going both directions. But this line here is right now. So with the present progressive, like I just outlined, I am walking. That's happening now. And it does have a connotation of continuing on for a little bit. So you could have like a dashed line like that. I am walking, and I'm going to be walking for a little while. But you don't have to do that if you don't want to. Now let's say that you're doing past tense. You might need to introduce that it happened in the past. So you'd have something like this. I walked to school. It just happened once. There it is. Now you can get as fancy and as elaborate with these as you want. It could be an ongoing thing that happened in the past. It could be something that happened in the past that has a connotation of continuing into the future, or it could be something that happened in the future or will happen in the future for a repeated number of times. This just depends on whatever grammar point you're teaching, whatever verb tense. So that timeline is a useful tool for you to help visually demonstrate a verb to your learner. So those are some tools for teaching grammar. Like I said, don't get stressed out about grammar. It's a simple process of just teaching one lesson at a time. The same rules apply of review, review, review. Just like I introduced a lot of material to you today, you don't want to overwhelm them. It could be overwhelming to think about simple past versus future versus progressive and all this terminology. Do one at a time. And don't feel like you have to teach those rules explicitly. Just teach it like you would really say it. That's going to be the most helpful thing for your learner. Okay?